In 1997, James Dale Davidson and Lord William Rees-Mogg published their radical manifesto, The Sovereign Individual. The book presented a bold, provocative vision predicting the inevitable and total collapse of the nation-state. They argued that as global wealth transitioned from physical assets to intangible, ethereal lines of digital code, the traditional state would eventually lose its primary ability to tax and control its own citizens. Using the vivid metaphor of the state as a farmer, they described the relationship between power structures. They claimed that taxpayers, who were once trapped in the field, would eventually grow wings and flee to borderless digital realms where the reach of government could no longer touch them. By the year 2026, their predictions regarding the rise of cryptocurrency have proven to be remarkably accurate. The explosion of the remote creator economy has fundamentally altered how individuals generate and store their wealth. The migration of high-net-worth individuals to tax-friendly jurisdictions has become a standard practice for the wealthy. The cognitive elite have leveraged advanced technology to capture the full, unadulterated value of their own labor. They have effectively become citizens of nowhere, existing in a space beyond the reach of borders. The authors correctly identified that when the underlying logic of violence shifts within a global society, the fundamental relationship between the protector and the protected must inevitably undergo a profound, lasting change. This transformation was predicted to liberate the individual from the shackles of centralized, territorial state authority. They envisioned a future where digital sovereignty would replace the outdated systems of the 20th century. The manifesto suggested that the state was a relic, destined to fade as digital networks grew stronger. It was a compelling argument that resonated with those who felt stifled by bureaucratic, heavy-handed government. The authors meticulously mapped out the technological forces that would eventually dismantle the old world order. They saw the internet not just as a tool, but as a catalyst for human liberation. The transition to digital assets was seen as the ultimate escape hatch for the productive individual. As wealth became portable, the state's monopoly on force would lose its most effective, coercive leverage. This shift promised a new era where merit and innovation would dictate one's individual success level. The sovereign individual would no longer be a subject, but a free participant in global markets. It was a blueprint for a world without the traditional constraints of citizenship or national loyalty. The vision was intoxicating to those who believed that technology could solve the problems of politics. They believed that the state would be forced to compete for citizens like a private business. If the state failed to provide value, the sovereign individual would simply take their business elsewhere. This market-based approach to governance was the cornerstone of their radical, forward-thinking economic theory. The authors argued that the era of the nation-state was drawing to a quiet, inevitable close. They saw the digital revolution as the final nail in the coffin of the old regime. The promise was clear. Technology would provide the tools for true, lasting, and personal individual autonomy. The field was no longer a cage. It was a launch pad for those with wings. The elite were the first to realize that they could outrun the reach of the state. They moved their capital into encrypted ledgers, far away from the prying eyes of tax authorities. The world was shrinking, yet the opportunities for the sovereign individual were expanding at light speed. Every transaction became a statement of independence from the traditional, centralized banking and political systems. The manifesto became a cult classic, read by those who sought to master the new digital. It provided a framework for understanding the rapid changes occurring in the global economy during 2026. The logic of the authors seemed bulletproof in an age of rapid, unrelenting technological disruption today. They foresaw the rise of decentralized finance long before it became a mainstream, everyday household reality. The sovereign individual was the protagonist of this new, borderless, and highly efficient digital world order. They were the ones who understood the power of code to rewrite the rules of society. The state, in their view, was merely a legacy system struggling to maintain its fading relevance. The transition was inevitable, driven by the unstoppable march of technological progress and human desire. The authors had captured the spirit of an age, defined by its rapid digital transformation. Their words served as a beacon for those who dreamed of a life beyond the state. The sovereign individual was not just a theory, but a roadmap for the future of humanity. It challenged the very foundations of how we define power, wealth, and the role of government. The vision remains a powerful testament to the belief that technology can truly set us free. The authors were pioneers, mapping the uncharted territory of a new, digital, and sovereign human existence. Their legacy lives on in every transaction that bypasses the traditional, state-controlled financial and legal systems. The sovereign individual continues to be a symbol of defiance against the old, decaying world. The prophecy was set in motion, and the world began to change in ways they predicted. The digital realm became the new frontier, a place where the sovereign individual could finally thrive. The old boundaries were dissolving, replaced by the fluid, interconnected networks of the new digital age. The sovereign individual stood at the center of this transformation, leading the way into the unknown. The manifesto was a call to action for those who dared to imagine a different future. It was a vision of a world where the individual was finally, truly, and completely sovereign. The prophecy of the sovereign individual had begun to unfold, changing the course of history forever. Despite these accurate forecasts, the state did not collapse. It merely adapted by digitizing its power. Rather than fighting technology, governments absorbed it, turning crypto exchanges into efficient, automated tax collectors. They utilized advanced digital surveillance to track wealth that once seemed entirely beyond their reach. The state now routinely revokes passports for tax debts, tightening its grip on the mobile elite. It taxes remote workers based on their employer's location, proving that the old rules still apply. While the cows grew wings to flee, the farmers simply bought radar to track their flight. The dream of total sovereignty remains a members-only club reserved exclusively for the global elite. Most individuals have merely traded state taxation for the heavy burden of platform rent and fees. The sovereign individual was a perfect map of technological forces, yet it failed in its analysis. It failed to account for the state's parasitic resilience and its ability to reinvent its own control. In 2026, true freedom remains elusive, as power has not vanished into the digital ether. Instead, power has migrated into the very digital systems meant to liberate us from it. The digital landscape, once envisioned as a borderless frontier, has become a new, fenced-in territory. Governments have learned to harvest data as effectively as they once harvested physical crops and labor. Every transaction, every line of code, and every digital movement leaves a trail for the state. The promise of anonymity in the blockchain was slowly eroded by regulations and KYC compliance laws. The cognitive elite might live in luxury, but they are still tethered to the state's infrastructure. They pay for their freedom with compliance, ensuring their digital assets remain accessible to the authorities. The farmer did not lose his field. He simply expanded his fence to include the cloud. The digital realm is no longer a sanctuary, but a mirror of the physical world's hierarchies. Surveillance is now baked into the architecture of our financial tools and our social communication platforms. We are monitored not by soldiers in the streets, but by algorithms in our own devices. The state's reach is now instantaneous, crossing borders without the need for traditional physical force. It is a silent, invisible coercion that shapes our choices before we even make them today. The prophecy of the sovereign individual was a beautiful dream of liberation from the nation-state. Yet, the reality is a complex web of digital dependencies that bind us tighter than before. We are citizens of nowhere, yet we are subjects of every platform that hosts our lives. The logic of violence has shifted, but the desire for control remains as potent as ever. The protector has become the architect of our digital confinement, watching from the central server. We sought to escape the farmer's field, only to find ourselves trapped in his digital cage. This transition was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, calculated integration of state and tech. The authors correctly identified the shift in wealth, but underestimated the state's capacity for evolution. They viewed the state as a static entity, unable to pivot when its traditional tools failed. They were wrong. The state is a living organism that feeds on the very tools of liberation. By digitizing tax collection, the government eliminated the friction that once allowed for true tax evasion. Now, the IRS receives automated reports, making the act of hiding income nearly impossible for most. The dream of the sovereign individual was built on the assumption that technology would outpace law. Instead, the law has been rewritten to incorporate the technological advancements of the last decade. We see this in the way stablecoins are regulated, treated exactly like traditional bank deposits today. The promise of decentralization has been tempered by the reality of centralized reporting and compliance. Even the most sophisticated crypto users find themselves eventually interacting with the regulated banking system. This interaction is the point where the state reclaims its authority and its share of wealth. The sovereign individual is not a person who exists outside the system, but within it. They are simply those who have learned to navigate the new rules of the digital game. The gap between the cognitive elite and the rest of society continues to widen every year. This inequality is not a bug of the system, but a feature of the digital economy. Those who master AI and digital tools capture the value that others are slowly losing. The state benefits from this concentration of wealth as it simplifies the process of taxation. It is easier to tax a few massive digital platforms than thousands of small physical businesses. The state has become more efficient, more intrusive, and more powerful than it was in 1997. The prophecy was right about the forces at play, but wrong about the final outcome. We are living in the world they predicted, but it is not the free world they envisioned. It is a world where the boundaries of the state have expanded into the virtual space. The wings the cows grew were not for escaping, but for flying into a larger field. Every attempt to break free is met with a new layer of digital oversight and regulation. The sovereign individual remains a powerful ideal, yet it is currently an unattainable goal for most. We must recognize that the struggle for freedom has moved from the physical to the digital. The fight is no longer about borders on a map, but about control over our data. In this new era, sovereignty is a constant negotiation with the systems that define our lives. The farmer is still watching, and the fence is now invisible, spanning the entire digital world.